The night did not arrive with a sudden closing of the sky or a swift descent of shadow. It came the way water fills a low place, slowly, without announcement, pooling in the spaces between things until the world was held in a soft, gray stillness. The transition from dusk to darkness was so gradual that there was no moment when one could say the light had gone. It had simply thinned into something else, something quieter. The air was cool and carried the weight of moisture, a thickness that made every breath feel deeper, slower. The landscape was undefined, a collection of gentle slopes and shallow valleys that seemed to extend in all directions without ever becoming a destination. There were no roads here, no paths worn into the earth by the passage of many feet. There was only the ground, damp and softened by the constant presence of the mist, and the night, which held everything in a state of patient suspension. The world was waiting, but it was not waiting for anything in particular. It was simply the condition of the place, a deep, unhurried readiness that had no beginning and would have no end. The mist was everywhere, though it did not move with any urgency. It drifted in slow, heavy layers, clinging to the low places and spreading itself thin across the higher ground. It was not a mist that obscured, it was a mist that softened. The edges of things were blurred, the distinctions between the earth and the sky made gentle and indistinct. The air tasted clean and faintly metallic, like the scent of stone that has been wet for a very long time. There was no wind, only the occasional, barely perceptible shift in the air that suggested the mist was alive in some slow, ancient way. The silence was thick and layered, a presence rather than an absence. It was the kind of silence that absorbs sound, that takes in the small movements of the world and holds them without echo. The night was vast and empty, but it was not lonely. It was a space that did not require filling. It was complete in its stillness, perfect in its lack of event. The darkness pressed gently against the world, holding everything in a soft embrace that asked for nothing and expected nothing in return. In the center of this quiet landscape, there was a place where the ground fell away. It was not a sudden drop, not a cliff or a chasm, but a gradual descent into a depth that could not be seen. The mist pooled here, thicker and heavier, moving with a slow, rolling motion that suggested the presence of something beneath, a river, perhaps, or a ravine filled with the accumulated darkness of many nights. The sound of water was so faint it was almost imagined, a distant rhythmic whisper that might have been the movement of a current or might have been only the shifting of the air. The edges of this descent were not defined, lost in the soft gray of the mist. There was no clear boundary between the solid ground and the empty space beyond. The world simply ceased to be firm and became something else, something that did not need to be understood or named. It was enough that it was there, a quiet interruption in the flat, endless terrain. The air here was slightly cooler, carrying a mineral scent that spoke of deep stone and water that had never seen the light of day. The bridge was not always visible. It was a thing that came and went according to laws that were older than language, older than the naming of places. When the mist was at its thickest, when the night had settled into its deepest stillness, the bridge would begin to appear. It did not emerge suddenly, did not announce itself with a sound or a change in the air. It simply became present, the way a thought becomes clear after a long time of quiet reflection. The bridge was narrow, built of stone that had been worn smooth by the passage of time and the constant touch of the moisture in the air. The stones were gray, the color of ash or of clouds seen from a great distance. They were fitted together without mortar, held in place by their own weight and the patient arrangement of centuries. The surface of the bridge was slightly damp, always cool to the touch, and it absorbed the light in a way that made it seem to glow faintly from within, a pale luminescence that was barely enough to distinguish it from the surrounding mist. The bridge was old, but it did not feel fragile. It felt like something that had always been there. The bridge stood alone, unsupported by any visible structure beneath. It spanned the space where the ground fell away, reaching from one undefined edge to another. There were no railings, no posts or beams to mark its sides. It was simply a flat, narrow path of stone that hung in the air, patient and still. The bridge did not creak or shift. It did not sway with the movement of the mist. It was as solid as the earth itself, as reliable as the passage of the night. The stones were cool and slightly rough, textured in a way that suggested they had been shaped by water rather than by tools. The edges of the bridge were softened, rounded by time, and the surface was worn into a shallow groove down the center where countless feet had walked. The condition of the bridge's existence was simple and absolute. It appeared only when no one stood upon it, when the space it occupied was vacant, when the air above its stones was undisturbed by the weight of a body or the presence of a thought. The bridge would slowly materialize from the mist. It would become real, solid, and available to those who needed to cross the empty space. But the moment a foot touched its surface, the moment the weight of a traveler pressed down upon the ancient stones, the bridge would begin the slow process of its withdrawal. It did not vanish immediately. It did not dissolve or collapse. It simply began to fade, returning to the mist from which it had emerged. The fading was so gradual that it could not be felt. The stones remained solid beneath the feet. The surface remained steady and reliable. But behind the walker, step by step, the bridge was softly returning to the condition of not being. It left no trace, no rubble or memory. It simply ceased without sound or consequence, becoming once again a part of the quiet, undifferentiated night. There was no explanation for this behavior, no story or legend that accounted for the bridge's nature. It was simply a fact of the place, a condition that had been observed and accepted without question. The bridge existed when it was empty, and it did not exist when it was occupied. The two states were inseparable, bound together in a rhythm that was as natural as the rise and fall of the mist itself. The night deepened, and the mist grew thicker. The air became heavier, more substantial, as if it were becoming something that could be touched or held. The silence was now complete, a soft, dense presence that filled the ears and the mind. There was no sound of birds or insects, no rustle of wind through unseen grasses. There was only the slow internal rhythm of the breath, the quiet pulse of the heart. The world had contracted to this single point, this quiet place where the ground fell away and the bridge waited in the mist. The darkness was not oppressive. It was not a thing that pressed down or threatened. It was simply the condition of the night, a gentle medium in which all things were held in suspension. The mist moved in slow, lazy spirals, revealing and concealing the bridge in a rhythm that had no pattern, no predictable sequence. Sometimes the bridge was fully visible, its pale stones glowing faintly in the diffused light of the unseen moon. Sometimes it was only a suggestion, a faint outline in the gray. And sometimes it was gone entirely, leaving only the empty space and the quiet certainty that it would return when the conditions were right. The ground near the edge of the descent was soft, yielding slightly beneath the weight of a step. It was covered in a thick layer of moss that absorbed all sound, turning the movement of a walker into a silent glide. The moss was cool and damp, smelling of deep earth and the slow decay of organic matter. It was a clean smell, not unpleasant, carrying with it the sense of a world that was constantly renewing itself in the dark. The edge of the solid ground was not marked by any barrier or warning. It simply ended, merging into the mist and the empty space beyond. To stand at this edge was to feel a kind of gentle vertigo, a sense of standing at the boundary between the known and the unknown. But it was not a frightening sensation. It was more like standing at the shore of a vast, calm sea, feeling the pull of the water without any fear of being swept away. The bridge, when it was present, offered a way across this boundary. It was an invitation, but it was never an insistent one. It simply existed, and the choice to cross or to remain was left entirely to the one who found themselves standing at the edge. The mist began to shift, moving with a slow, deliberate motion that suggested the presence of a current in the air. The layers separated and drifted apart, and through the gaps, the bridge became visible once more. It was complete now, fully present, stretching from one side of the descent to the other in smooth, unbroken line. The stones were pale and cool, their surfaces reflecting the faint light in a way that made them seem to float just above the mist. The bridge was narrow, wide enough for a single person to walk comfortably, but not so wide that one could move without awareness of the edges. The sides of the bridge dropped away into the mist and the darkness below, but there was no sense of danger in this. The bridge was solid. It was reliable. It had been walked upon by countless travelers before, and it would be walked upon by countless travelers yet to come. Each crossing was the same. Each crossing was the only one. The bridge did not remember the feet that had touched its stones. It existed only in the present moment, only in the eternal now of its appearance and disappearance, serving its quiet purpose without question or complaint. The air above the bridge was slightly warmer than the air around it, as if the stones held some faint memory of the sun that had touched them during the distant day. This warmth was barely perceptible, a difference so slight it could only be felt by standing very still and paying close attention. The mist did not settle on the surface of the bridge. It moved around it, flowing past in slow, curling patterns that never quite touched the stones. This created a kind of invisible boundary, a space of clear air that surrounded the bridge and made it seem separate from the rest of the world. The bridge was a place unto itself, a small island of solidity in a sea of gray uncertainty. To step onto the bridge was to enter a different state of being, a condition of transition that was neither here nor there, neither arrived nor departed. It was a space between, a moment held in suspension, and the act of crossing was not a journey so much as a meditation on the nature of movement itself. The bridge asked nothing of those who walked upon it except that they keep moving forward, one step at a time, trusting in the solidity beneath their feet. The first step onto the bridge was always the same. The foot found the stone, felt its cool, slightly rough surface, and the weight shifted forward. The stone was solid, utterly reliable, and it bore the weight without any sign of strain or movement. There was no sound of the footfall, no echo or reverberation. The step was absorbed into the silence, becoming part of the stillness rather than breaking it. The body moved forward, and the second step followed the first with the same slow, deliberate rhythm. The walking was not hurried. There was no reason to rush, no destination that required swift arrival. The crossing was the point, the act of moving from one side to the other, and the pace was set by the breath, by the slow internal rhythm of the body finding its balance. The bridge stretched ahead, pale and narrow, disappearing into the mist at both ends. There was no way to see the far side from the beginning, no way to know how long the crossing would take. It was necessary to trust the bridge, to trust that it would continue to exist beneath the feet for as long as it was needed, even as it faded silently behind. Behind the walker, the bridge began its slow fade. It was not a collapse or a crumbling. It was a gentle dissolution, a return to the mist from which it had come. The stones did not fall away or disappear with a sudden absence. They simply became less present, less solid, until they were no longer there at all. The fading happened without sound, without any physical sensation that could be felt by the walker. The only way to know that it was happening was to turn and look back, to see the space where the bridge had been now filled with only mist and empty air. But there was no need to look back. The forward direction was the only direction that mattered. The bridge existed in the present moment, in the space directly beneath the feet, and that was enough. The past was dissolving, becoming part of the night, and the future had not yet arrived. There was only the step, the breath, the cool touch of the stone, and the slow, steady movement forward through the gray stillness. The walker moved in a kind of trance, the steps automatic, the mind empty of thought, held by the rhythm of the crossing. The mist around the bridge was in constant, subtle motion. It rose and fell in slow waves, creating patterns that were almost visible, almost meaningful, but never quite resolving into anything that could be named or understood. The light within the mist was diffused and sourceless, coming from everywhere and nowhere at once. It was the light of a moon that was hidden behind layers of cloud, or the light of stars that were too distant to be seen, but still present enough to cast their faint glow. The light was not bright enough to see clearly, but it was enough to navigate by, enough to distinguish the pale stones of the bridge from the darker gray of the surrounding air. The walker moved through this light like a shadow, a dark shape against the pale surface of the bridge, moving with a slow, rhythmic grace that matched the breathing of the night. The world beyond the bridge was invisible, lost in the mist and the darkness. There was no sense of what lay on either side of the crossing, no indication of what the bridge connected or why it existed. It was simply there, a path through the emptiness, and the act of walking was its own justification, its own complete purpose. The stones of the bridge were not uniform. Each one was slightly different in size and shape, worn by time into unique contours that could be felt through the soles of the feet. Some stones were smooth, almost glassy, while others retained a slight roughness, a texture that suggested they had been taken from a riverbed or quarried from ancient rock. The differences were subtle, barely noticeable, but they created a rhythm in the walking, a gentle variation in the sensation of each step that kept the mind from wandering too far. The bridge was a tactile experience as much as a visual one. The coolness of the stone, the slight dampness in the air, the way the mist brushed against the face and hands, all of these sensations combined to create a sense of place, a feeling of being present in a specific moment. The crossing was not an abstraction. It was a physical reality, a movement through space that required the full engagement of the body. The mind could rest, could drift into the gentle emptiness of thought, but the body remained alert, attuned to the subtle shifts in texture and temperature beneath the feet, moving forward with patient certainty. Halfway across, the bridge felt like it had always been there. The beginning was forgotten, the end was not yet visible, and there was only the endless present of the crossing. The mist had thickened to the point where even the immediate surroundings were barely visible. The bridge seemed to float in a sea of gray, disconnected from any land or solid reference point. The sensation was not disorienting, it was calming, a feeling of being held in a vast, soft emptiness that required nothing and expected nothing. The walker moved in a state of deep stillness, the steps automatic, the mind empty of thought. There was no sense of time passing, no awareness of duration or distance. The crossing had become a state of being, a condition of existence that was complete in itself. The bridge did not ask for attention or effort. It simply supported the weight, bore the passage, and continued to exist in its slow, patient way. The stones were cool beneath the feet. The air was still and heavy, and the silence was absolute. The world had contracted to this single moment, this single point of movement through the gray vastness of the night. The mist began to shift again, parting slightly to reveal a hint of what lay beneath the bridge. The darkness below was profound, a deep, velvety blackness that seemed to absorb all light. There was a suggestion of depth, of space extending downward into an abyss that had no bottom. But there was no fear in this revelation. The darkness was not menacing. It was simply there, a presence that existed beneath the bridge in the same way that the mist existed around it. The faint sound of water could be heard now, a distant rhythmic whisper that suggested a slow-moving current far below. The sound was not loud enough to be intrusive, not clear enough to be certain. It was more of a feeling than a sound, a sense of movement in the depths that was felt in the chest rather than heard with the ears. The walker did not look down. There was no need to confirm what was already known. The bridge spanned something, and that something was best left unexamined. The forward direction was the only direction, and the act of crossing was the only act that mattered in this moment of suspended time. The stones of the bridge were becoming warmer beneath the feet, though the air remained cool. It was a subtle shift, barely noticeable, but it suggested that the crossing was nearing its end. The warmth was not uncomfortable. It was a gentle, reassuring sensation, like the touch of a hand or the proximity of another body. The bridge was offering its final support, its last gift of solidity, before it would begin the inevitable process of fading. The mist ahead began to thin, revealing the suggestion of solid ground on the far side. The edge of the bridge was not yet visible, but the sense of approaching completion was unmistakable. The rhythm of the walking remained unchanged, slow and steady, but there was a shift in the quality of the movement, a sense of the body preparing to transition from the crossing back to the stillness of arrival. The bridge had done its work. It had held the weight, borne the passage, and now it was ready to release the walker back into the wider world of the night. The air grew fractionally warmer, carrying a scent that was no longer just mist and stone, but something more immediate, more present. The far edge of the bridge emerged from the mist like a memory surfacing from deep water. It was a clean line, a clear boundary between the pale stones and the dark, moss-covered ground beyond. The walker slowed, allowing the final steps to extend, to stretch out the moment of transition. The last stone was smooth and cool, worn into a gentle depression by the countless feet that had walked this same path. The foot lifted, crossed the threshold, and found the soft earth on the other side. The sensation was immediate and profound, a return to solidity, to the patient, unmoving ground that did not fade or dissolve. The walker stood still for a moment, feeling the change, allowing the body to adjust to the new condition. The bridge was still there, stretching back into the mist, but even as the walker watched, it began the final stage of its disappearance. The stones grew paler, less defined, until they were only suggestions in the gray air. And then they were gone, leaving only the mist and the empty space where the bridge had been. The crossing was complete, and the bridge had returned to its natural state of absence. The ground on this side of the crossing was the same as the ground on the other side, soft, damp, covered in a thick layer of moss that absorbed all sound. The landscape was equally undefined, equally lost in the mist and the darkness. There was no sense of having arrived at a destination, no feeling of completion or achievement. The crossing had simply ended, and the walker was now in a different place, though that place felt remarkably similar to the one that had been left behind. The night was the same. The silence was the same. The mist moved with the same slow, heavy motion, rolling through the air in patterns that had no meaning. The act of crossing had changed nothing in the world. It had only changed the position of the walker, moving them from one side of the emptiness to the other. But the emptiness remained, vast and patient, ready to be crossed again by the next traveler who found their way to the quiet, forgotten place where the bridge waited. The walker turned and looked back at the space where the bridge had been. The mist was thick now, impenetrable, revealing nothing. There was no bridge, no stones, no pale path through the air. The walker moved away from the edge of the crossing, stepping deeper into the undefined landscape on this side of the divide. The moss was thick beneath the feet, soft and yielding, and it released a faint, clean scent of moisture and earth. The mist closed in, wrapping around the body like a cool, damp cloak. The world contracted to the immediate surroundings, to the few feet of visible ground and the gray air that pressed close on all sides. There was no sense of direction, no landmarks to guide the way. The walker simply moved, following some internal compass that required no external validation. The night was deep and still, holding everything in its soft, gray embrace. The silence was a physical presence, a weight that pressed gently against the ears and the mind. There was no need for thought, no need for planning or decision. The walker moved through the mist with a slow, automatic grace, trusting the body to find its way through the darkness. The bridge was behind, the crossing was complete, and now there was only the continuation of the night, the endless, patient darkness that held all things in suspension without judgment or demand. The mist began to thin as the walker moved further from the place of the crossing. The air grew slightly clearer, though the darkness remained profound. The shapes of low hills could be seen in the distance, darker gray against the lighter gray of the sky. The ground began to rise, a gentle slope that led upward towards some unseen height. The walker followed this slope, moving with the same slow, deliberate pace, the feet finding purchase on the soft, moss-covered earth. The act of walking had become a meditation, a rhythmic movement that required no thought, no attention. The body moved, the breath flowed in and out, and the world passed by in a series of subtle, barely noticed changes. The night was a vast container, holding the walker and the landscape and the mist in a single, unified embrace. There was no separation between the self and the world. There was only the movement, the breath, and the slow, patient passage of time. The bridge was a memory now, a faint impression in the mind that was already beginning to fade into the general texture of the night, becoming indistinct and soft. At the top of the rise, the walker paused. The landscape spread out in all directions, a series of low hills and shallow valleys that extended to the limits of vision and beyond. The mist lay in the low places, thick and heavy, while the higher ground was relatively clear, allowing a view of the night sky. The stars were visible now, distant points of light that flickered with a slow, hypnotic regularity. They were cold and remote, infinitely far away, but their light was a comfort, a reminder that the universe was vast and ordered and governed by laws that were older than time. The walker stood in the center of this landscape, a small dark shape against the gray expanse of the night. The bridge was far behind now, invisible in the mist and the distance. It was once again empty, once again existing in its patient, solitary state, waiting for the next traveler who might need to cross. The cycle would continue, endless and unchanging, as long as the night existed and the mist rose from the low places. The walker did not think of this. The walker simply stood, breathing the cool night air, feeling the presence of the vast, quiet world held in the soft embrace of the darkness. The descent on the far side of the rise was gentle, a slow slope that led down into another valley where the mist was beginning to gather. The walker moved downward, following the natural contours of the land, the feet finding their way without conscious guidance. The air grew warmer as the descent continued, a subtle shift in temperature that suggested the presence of sheltered ground ahead. The mist was thicker here, moving in slow rolling waves that obscured the ground and made each step a small act of faith. The walker moved through this mist with confidence, trusting the body to maintain its balance, trusting the ground to remain solid beneath the feet. The night was deepening now, moving toward that point of absolute darkness that comes just before the first hint of dawn. But dawn was still far away, a distant promise that had no relevance to the present moment. There was only the night, the mist, and the slow, steady movement through the darkness. The walker's mind was empty now, a vast, quiet space that held no thoughts, no memories, no anticipation of the future. There was only the sensation of being present, of existing in the center of the night, surrounded by the soft gray embrace of the mist and the deep silence. The ground leveled out at the bottom of the valley, becoming flat and soft, covered in a thick layer of moss that released a rich, earthy scent with each step. The mist was at its thickest here, a dense white curtain that reduced visibility to only a few feet in any direction. The walker moved slowly, feeling the way forward with the feet, trusting the ground to reveal itself step by step. There was no sense of urgency, no need to reach any particular destination. The walking had become an end in itself, a state of being that was complete in its simplicity. The body moved, the breath flowed, and the world continued its slow, patient existence. The bridge was a distant memory now, a thing that had existed in a different time, a different place. The crossing had been completed, and the walker had moved on, leaving the bridge to fade back into the mist and wait for the next empty moment when it would once again appear. The cycle was eternal, the pattern was unbroken, and the night held all things in its vast, gentle embrace. The walker continued forward, moving deeper into the mist, the steps becoming slower, softer, until they were barely distinguishable from the silence itself. The mist began to glow faintly, illuminated by a light that had no visible source. It was not the light of the moon, which was hidden behind layers of cloud, nor was it the light of the stars, which were too distant to cast more than the faintest glow. It was a light that seemed to come from within the mist itself, a soft, diffused radiance that made the air shimmer with a gentle, silvery luminescence. The walker moved through this glowing mist like a shadow, a dark shape against the pale, ethereal light. The world had become dreamlike, unreal, a place where the normal rules of perception no longer applied. But there was no sense of disorientation, no feeling of being lost or confused. The walker moved with confidence, trusting the body to find its way through the strange, beautiful landscape. The ground beneath the feet remained solid, the air remained cool and still, and the silence remained absolute. The bridge was gone, but its memory lingered, a faint echo in the mind that suggested the possibility of crossing, the potential for transition. The night was a space of infinite possibility, a vast empty canvas on which anything might appear and disappear without consequence or permanence. The walker came to a place where the ground dipped down into a small hollow, a sheltered space where the mist hung thick and heavy, almost tangible. The air here was warmer, carrying the scent of earth and growing things, of roots and moss and the slow decay of organic matter. The walker descended into this hollow, moving carefully, feeling the way down the gentle slope. At the bottom, the ground was soft and yielding, covered in a thick carpet of moss that absorbed all sound and made each step a silent glide. The walker paused here, standing in the center of the hollow, surrounded by the thick, glowing mist. The world had contracted to this small space, this quiet shelter in the vastness of the night. There was a sense of safety here, of being held and protected by the land itself. The hollow was a womb, a place of rest and renewal, and the walker stood in its center, breathing slowly, feeling the warmth of the earth rising up through the soles of the feet. The bridge was a distant memory, a thing that belonged to a different time, a different state of being. The crossing had been necessary, but it was complete now. The walker sat down on the soft moss, feeling the cool, damp earth beneath. The body relaxed, the muscles releasing their tension, the breath deepening and slowing. The mist pressed close, a soft gray blanket that wrapped around the body and held it in a gentle embrace. The silence was profound, a thick, heavy presence that filled the ears and the mind. There was no need to think, no need to plan or worry. There was only the present moment, the sensation of being here, in this place, in this quiet hollow in the center of the night. The bridge was gone, faded back into the mist and the emptiness from which it had come. It would appear again in its own time, when the space above it was once more empty and the need for a crossing arose. But that was in the future, and the future was not yet real. There was only the now, the soft moss beneath the body, the cool mist against the face, and the deep, patient silence of the night. The walker closed their eyes, not to sleep, but to rest, to allow the body and the mind to settle into the stillness. The world continued its slow, patient existence, and the walker was a part of it. The mist moved in slow, lazy spirals around the hollow, creating patterns that were almost visible, almost meaningful, but never quite resolving into anything that could be understood. The light within the mist pulsed faintly, a gentle, rhythmic glow that matched the slow beating of the walker's heart. The world was breathing in and out, and the walker was breathing with it, the two rhythms synchronized into a single unified pulse. The bridge existed somewhere in the distance, hidden in the mist, waiting in its patient, empty state. It was a constant, a fixed point in a world of flux and change. It appeared when it was empty, it existed during the crossing, and it faded when the crossing was complete. The cycle was eternal, unchanging, a pattern that had been repeated countless times and would be repeated countless times more. The walker did not think of this. The walker simply breathed, simply existed, simply rested in the center of the quiet hollow, held by the earth and the mist and the deep, patient night. Time passed, though there was no way to measure it. The night remained deep and still. The mist remained thick and glowing. The walker's breathing became slower, deeper, synchronizing completely with the slow pulse of the earth. The mist moved in rhythm with the breath, rising and falling in gentle waves that seemed to carry the walker deeper into the stillness. The hollow was a perfect shelter, a place where the world could not intrude, where the noise and the chaos of existence could not penetrate. The walker was safe here, held by the earth and the mist and the night. The bridge was a distant reality now, a thing that existed in another place, another state of being. The crossing had been a transition, a movement from one side to the other, but the destination had been this quiet hollow, this place of rest, this moment of absolute stillness in the center of the night. The walker's eyes remained closed, the body remained still, and the world continued its slow, patient existence. The cycle was unbroken, the pattern was eternal, and the night held all things in its vast, gentle embrace. The bridge would fade and appear, endlessly, timelessly, serving its quiet purpose in the heart of the mist. The walker rested, and the night continued, and the world was at peace.